Imagine walking through a bustling medieval market. The air is thick with the smell of spices, roasted meat, and wet cobblestones. Merchants shout over each other, hawking everything from iron tools to fine jewelry. But among all the treasures glittering under the dim light of torches, one item commands a price higher than gold, higher even than jewels. A piece of fabric so rare, so coveted, that wars were fought over it, kings were bankrupted by it, and smuggling it could mean death. This is the story of the most valuable fabric in the medieval world. But before you guess what it was, remember this: in the Middle Ages, fabric wasn't just clothing. It was power. What you wore could define your entire social standing. Nobles dressed not for comfort, but for status. Their garments were messages, visible proof of their wealth, their alliances, and their right to rule. To wear the wrong fabric could cost you your reputation. To wear the right one could make you untouchable. So what was this legendary material? Silk. But not just any silk. Chinese silk. The shimmering, impossibly soft threads that came from a tiny worm and could command its weight in silver. For nearly 2,000 years, China guarded the secret of silk, making with an obsession that bordered on paranoia. Anyone caught smuggling silkworm eggs or cocoons out of the empire faced execution. And yet, every king, every merchant, every queen from Rome to Paris to Baghdad craved it. To truly understand how valuable silk was, you need to imagine the world before globalization, when distance meant danger. The Silk Road, stretching from China to Europe, wasn't a single road but a vast network of routes crossing deserts, mountains, and empires. From Xi'an in China to Constantinople and beyond, silk traveled in secret caravans guarded by armed men. Along the way, it passed through the hands of hundreds of traders, each taking a small fortune in profit. By the time a single bolt of silk reached Europe, its price had multiplied hundreds of times over. In medieval England, a yard of fine silk could cost more than a farm worker's yearly wage. Only kings, queens, and the wealthiest nobles could afford entire garments made of it. A royal robe of pure silk wasn't just clothing. It was a declaration that you stood above the rest of humanity. But silk's story isn't just about beauty and luxury. It's also about espionage, greed, and power. For centuries, China was the only civilization that knew how to make silk. The process was mysterious and sacred. Farmers raised silkworms on mulberry leaves, carefully boiling their cocoons to unravel the shimmering threads. It took thousands of worms to make just one robe, and the technique was a state secret more valuable than gold. Then, in one of history's most daring acts of industrial espionage, the secret of silk escaped. The Byzantine Empire, desperate to end its dependence on Chinese imports, sent 2 monks eastward disguised as holy men. After years of travel, they smuggled silkworm eggs back to Constantinople hidden inside hollow bamboo canes. When Emperor Justinian unwrapped them, Europe's first silk industry was born. But even then, the Byzantines controlled the trade with an iron fist. They built state-run factories and guarded their looms like fortresses. Only the emperor and his court could wear pure silk garments. Ordinary citizens, even the wealthy, had to settle for blends of wool and linen. Over time, the art of silk weaving spread westward through the Mediterranean. Islamic artisans in Baghdad and Damascus perfected techniques that transformed silk into tapestries of color and light. Their patterns, geometric, floral, and calligraphic, became symbols of sophistication across the known world. When crusaders returned from the Holy Land, they brought back not just tales of battle, but silk garments so dazzling that European nobles were hypnotized. And soon, another empire rose to claim silk's glory: Venice. By the 13th century, Venetian merchants dominated Europe's luxury trade. Their ships sailed to Constantinople, Alexandria, and the Levant, returning with bolts of shimmering silk. In the shadowy warehouses along the Grand Canal, silk was more valuable than spices, silver, or gold. Entire guilds were formed around it, with strict rules about who could weave it, dye it, or sell it. A single Venetian silk gown could cost the equivalent of a noble's estate. But as silk spread, so did the laws to control it. Medieval societies were obsessed with hierarchy, and even clothing was regulated by sumptuary laws. These laws dictated who could wear what. If you were a commoner and dared to appear in public wearing silk, even as trim or lining, you could be fined or even imprisoned. because silk wasn't just fabric. It was identity. It was the shimmering proof that you belonged to the ruling class. Yet, for all its luxury, silk wasn't the only precious fabric of the Middle Ages. There were others, each with its own story, its own legacy of power and prestige. One of them was velvet. Born in Italy during the late Middle Ages, velvet became the fabric of Renaissance royalty. Its deep pile and rich sheen caught candlelight like liquid. Weavers in Genoa and Florence mastered its creation using silk threads, making it both elegant and unimaginably expensive. Wearing velvet was like wearing wealth itself, soft, dark, and seductive. Then there was brocade, a fabric woven with threads of gold or silver. Kings wore it to coronations, popes wore it at mass, and brides wore it to show their family's power. Real gold thread was beaten so thin that it could be woven like hair, yet strong enough to glimmer for centuries. And of course, there was wool, the backbone of the medieval economy. England's wealth was built on it. Towns like Florence and Bruges thrived because of the wool trade. The best wool was so fine it could rival silk in softness, and merchants grew rich shipping it across Europe. But even the finest wool couldn't match the aura of silk. Silk was different. Silk was alive. It glowed, it flowed, it whispered. And in that glow lay something else, something invisible but powerful: secrecy. Throughout history, silk shaped entire economies and political alliances. It was used to buy peace treaties, bribe officials, and fund wars. Even the Mongols, who conquered half the world, understood silk's worth. Genghis Khan's armies carried it not only for trade but for survival. Silk shirts could sometimes stop an arrow by wrapping tightly around the wound, instead of letting the arrowhead tear flesh apart. By the late Middle Ages, silk had become a global obsession. Italian cities like Lucca, Venice, and Florence competed to produce the most exquisite designs. Master dyers experimented with colors so vibrant that they seemed supernatural. Crimson from Kermes insects, blue from lapis lazuli, gold from saffron. Every hue told a story of trade, conquest, and chemistry. And for the women who wore these gowns, silk was more than beauty. It was armor. A queen's gown of crimson silk might weigh 40 pounds, but it gave her power in a world that often denied her voice. A merchant's wife in Paris, wearing a thin strip of silk at her sleeves, could signal her rising status. Every thread carried meaning. But silk's reign wasn't without controversy. Religious leaders often condemned it. Monks preached that silk was a symbol of vanity and sin. In their eyes, luxury corrupted the soul. Yet, ironically, church altars and vestments were draped in the very same fabric, because nothing else looked as divine. By the 15th century, silk had conquered the world. It had traveled from Chinese silkworm farms to Byzantine looms, from Arab workshops to Italian palaces. It was the first truly global product, a thread that connected East and West long before ships or telegraphs. And yet, even as Europe's looms buzzed and fashion evolved, one thing remained true. No fabric ever replaced silk's status. Its feel, its shine, its history, all unmatched. Even today, thousands of years later, when you touch real silk, you're feeling the same material that once wrapped emperors, saints, and conquerors.